Lily woke up in a worn-out old room. After greeting Zenos, she quickly brewed a pot of hot tea for the two of them to enjoy together. In their world, a healer who could only mend wounds was considered third-rate. One who could heal the human soul was second-rate, and one who could heal the entire world was first-rate. The Kingdom of Hazes was a place that had written history alongside its healers. The healers had played a vital role in expanding the kingdom and building its prestige. They gathered at the Royal Healing Institute to study advanced healing arts. Once they earned their certification, each would set out on their own path. Yet in a small corner of that kingdom, there lived a healer with no formal training and no license to practice. That was Zenos. Despite this, many people still trusted him and sought him out. While Zenos went out to see patients, Lily would stay home and cook. As Lily was busy in the kitchen, Carmilla showed up. But the girl seemed so used to this by now that she was not the least bit surprised. Carmilla was visibly excited about the dishes Lily was preparing. Lily, too, was quite confident in her cooking skills. Since the food was not ready yet, Carmilla went back to her room. Just then, Zofia also arrived and decided to stay and wait for Zenos to return. Shortly after, Linga came as well. Zofia and Linga locked eyes, sparks practically flying between them. Lily refused to back down either, claiming Zenos as her own. Lo was far more brash, smashing the door the moment she arrived. They all sat in the room waiting for Zenos to come home. Lily cheerfully invited them to stay for dinner, and of course, no one refused. Lily asked them to keep an eye on the stew while she went to bring in the laundry, but they could not resist the tempting aroma and started eating. At first it was just a taste, but then they could not stop and devoured the entire pot. By the time they realized they had caused a serious problem, it was already too late. They began blaming each other and wanted to cook a new pot. But Lily walked in and discovered everything. She demanded an explanation. Yet all three pointed fingers at one another, and an argument broke out. Lily was deeply upset but did not want to bicker with them, because fighting would only make Zenos angry. All she wanted was to share a meal together with Zenos and everyone else. Only then did the three of them admit their fault and offer to help her cook dinner again. But by now the ingredients were all gone, so there was nothing left to work with. When Carmilla found out, she was furious and threatened to devour their very souls. The three of them dropped to their knees in terror, begging for forgiveness. Lily told them to go gather ingredients so she could prepare the meal again before Zenos returned. Each of them promised to complete the task. On his way home, Zenos happened to pass by Tur. The girl had a stomachache and went to a healing clinic, but was turned away because she had no money. Tur's master, Forbes, dragged her back in a rage to keep working. He looked down on Tur for being a demi-human and hurled her straight into a gravestone. A stream of dark smoke surged from the grave and seeped into her body, causing Tur agonizing pain. Seeing that Tur could not get back up, Forbes showed no sympathy whatsoever and kicked her away. He ordered her to keep working, warning that if she failed to deliver results, she would go hungry that day. Consumed by the dark energy, Tur lost control and lunged at Forbes. He fled in terror and ran right into Zenos. He begged Zenos to save him but said nothing about the true nature of the work he forced her to do. Zenos rescued Forbes but did not harm Tur either, for his calling was not to kill. Forbes, however, only cared about his own life. Slaves like Tur meant nothing to him. Those words stirred a memory in Zenos, a moment when he stood among countless fallen bodies, and it was that memory that drove him to become a healer so he could save as many lives as possible. Tur continued her assault. Zenos noticed that her speed and combat ability were far beyond those of an ordinary beastkin. Tur could not land a single blow on Zenos. Instead, she was knocked flying, sending a section of wall crashing down onto Forbes. Tur collapsed on the ground, completely drained. Zenos genuinely wanted to treat her. She crawled toward him, crying out in pain, but the moment Zenos got close, she bit into his forearm. Zenos was not the least bit angry and went ahead with the treatment. The wounds on Tur's body healed instantly, and the dark smoke was drawn out of her. Zenos did not understand what kind of work Tur had been forced to do that led to a vengeful spirit latching onto her, but he helped her dispel it nonetheless. Forbes managed to dig himself out of the rubble, though his injuries were far from minor. He wanted Zenos to heal him, but Zenos refused, saying his working hours were over, and if Forbes wanted treatment, there would be an after-hours fee. Forbes tossed out a pouch of gold coins, but for Zenos, it was not enough. He demanded that Tur be handed over as well to cover the remaining cost. Forbes, naturally, would not hesitate to trade a slave for his own life. The deal was struck. Zenos healed Forbes on the spot, then took Tur's slave contract as payment. Forbes stormed off, seething at his rotten luck. Zenos sat quietly beside Tur, waiting for her to wake up. The moment Tur regained consciousness, Zenos told her to remove her clothing so he could examine her condition. Though deeply embarrassed, Tur had no choice but to comply, since Zenos was now her master. Sure enough, Zenos' suspicion was correct. A gallstone was blocking her bile duct, causing inflammation. He had noticed her condition when he first walked past her, which was why he followed. Knowing the problem, Zenos treated her swiftly. What was truly astonishing was that he used no incantations, no magic formations, and left no scars, yet still cured her completely. Tur was deeply grateful and vowed to do anything to repay him. Zenos pulled out a small notebook and asked Tur to help him find what was written inside. Tur quickly led Zenos to a spot where the medicinal herb he needed was growing. Afterward, Zenos tore up her slave contract and set her free. For now, Tur still did not know where she wanted to go, but she wanted to live on her own terms and find out. Tur promised that once she found her place, she would come back and tell Zenos about it. And so they parted ways there. Zenos returned home just as Zofia, Linga, and Lo came back carrying loads of cooking ingredients. Lily happily headed into the kitchen to start cooking. Zenos stored the herbs he had found in the kitchen, then settled comfortably into a chair to wait for Lily's dinner. Lily, ever thoughtful, brewed a fresh pot of tea for everyone to enjoy. Aston arrogantly tossed a single gold coin at Zenos' feet and sneered at him for being poor. He felt he had grown powerful enough that he no longer needed Zenos. He had only brought Zenos into the squad to have someone to boss around, and when danger came, he would throw him out as a human shield without a shred of remorse. To him, poor commoners like Zenos were no different from livestock. He dismissed every contribution Zenos had ever made to the squad. He was dreaming of impressing the nobility and even royalty, so keeping Zenos around would only drag down his status. The gold coin was severance pay and hush money all in one, meant to keep Zenos quiet about the Golden Phoenix squad ever having a slum-born member. Zenos felt no regret and walked away to the mocking laughter of his former comrades. While walking down the road, he came across a group of slave traders roughing up Lily, so he spent his only gold coin to buy her freedom. Afterward, Zenos treated Lily's injuries. He even took her out to eat and bought her a few sets of clothes. Although Zenos himself was now penniless, the thought of leaving Lily in the slums and what might happen to her there frightened him. At that moment, Zenos and Lily shared something in common. Neither of them had a place to call home. Just as Zenos was about to look for a temporary place to rent, a man stumbled in with burns from a magic gun. Zenos treated him on the spot and was paid for his work. It was then that Zenos had a sudden realization. Healing could be his way to make a living. He decided to open a healing clinic. But because he came from the slums, he could never obtain a license and could only operate as an unlicensed healer. Lily was eager to serve as his assistant, but Zenos was still worried, since running an unlicensed clinic was against the law, and he did not want to drag Lily into danger with him. Even so, Lily was resolute and insisted on following her master. Left with no other choice, Zenos agreed to let Lily stay with him until he could find a safe place for her. They found their way to a ruined district, since opening a clinic out in the open streets was out of the question. Zenos picked out a fairly large abandoned building, but Lily was a little scared because she knew places like this tended to spawn phantom creatures. If a specter appeared, it would be even more dangerous, as specters were the most formidable among the undead. They might look human on the outside, but a single touch could mean death. Zenos pushed the door open and stepped inside anyway. Lily cast a simple spell to create a light that illuminated their surroundings. Zenos thought the place was not bad at all since it had a solid roof and sturdy pillars and only needed a bit of fixing up. After all, back when he was still in the squad, he often had to sleep outdoors all by himself. A specter flew past and snuffed out the light in Lily's hand. Carmilla had caught the scent of the living and drifted toward them. Lily clutched the hem of Zenos' coat in fear. Zenos, however, remained perfectly calm because he had anticipated this. With a single move, Zenos drove Carmilla back and even boasted about having taken down hundreds of her kind before. Back then, Aston had thrown Zenos into the deepest level of an underground labyrinth just to vent his anger. Down there, Zenos had encountered countless phantom creatures and learned firsthand that they were weak against healing magic. Zenos tried to negotiate with Carmilla about sharing the building, but Carmilla flew into a rage and went for his life. This time he struck a bit harder, which only infuriated Carmilla further. prompting her to summon her underlings for backup. Zenos wiped them all out in a single blow. Only then did Carmilla realize Zenos was someone she should not provoke, so she conceded the first floor to him. The next morning, Zenos quickly cleaned up the building. Lily wanted to go out and advertise their clinic, but Zenos stopped her, warning that it would attract the attention of the Royal Healing Institute. Right after that, their very first patient arrived. Zond, the man Zenos had healed the night before. He had brought along his older sister, Zofia, hoping Zenos could help her. Zofia showed Zenos her injured arm. One glance was all Zenos needed to recognize that her wound was also caused by a magic gun, but one fitted with a special poison enchantment. The bullet inside was drawing out pus and causing the wound to fester. Zenos knew this because he himself had nearly been used as a test subject for that very weapon. The arm was beyond saving and had to be amputated to keep the poison from spreading, and the cost for the procedure would be 1 million yen. Zofia tried to use her reputation to negotiate the price down. The moment Zenos heard the name Zofia the Tempest, he knew she was the infamous leader of the Lizardman faction, a feared figure in the slums. They specialized in robbing corrupt merchants and sharing part of the spoils with the poor. Zofia was the hero of the slums, but when she heard that the 1 million yen was for Zenos to regrow an entirely new arm, she found it hard to believe. Zenos himself had not realized that what he considered routine was something ordinary healers could not do at all. Zofia agreed to let Zenos proceed. He used an enchanted blade to sever the necrotic arm, while simultaneously casting a localized auto-recovery spell to ease Zofia's pain. Then he applied a protective barrier to stop the bleeding and activated a multi-layered healing spell, accelerating regeneration 10,000-fold. Zofia's arm grew back, good as new. The procedure took a considerable toll on Zenos' stamina. Zofia was utterly astonished by his healing abilities. Zond was even more stunned to see him living under the same roof as a specter. Zofia began to take a keen interest in Zenos and asked him to treat her people in the future, promising to pay fairly. After a long day of work, Lily brewed a pot of black tea for everyone to enjoy. That day they had seen a great number of Lizardman patients. Zenos was certain they were clashing with another faction. The slums were dominated by 3 major demi-human factions locked in constant struggle: the Lizardmen, the Orcs, and the Werewolves. Right on cue, Linga, the werewolf leader, burst through the door with her followers, looking for Zenos. She was known as a ruthless tyrant and the kingpin of the underground gambling dens. Linga had witnessed Zofia's fighters recovering instantly no matter how badly they were beaten, and that was what led her here. She intended to kill Zenos so that no one could heal Zofia's people, giving her the upper hand. But before Linga's axe could even touch Zenos' neck, it chipped in several places. Lily followed Zenos' instructions and retreated to a back room for safety. The entire pack of werewolves rushed him at once, yet none of them could so much as scratch Zenos. Seeing that brute force was useless, Linga ordered her followers to wreck the place instead, ignoring Zenos' warnings entirely. Someone daring to destroy her home was something Carmilla could not tolerate. Fortunately, Zenos intervened just in time to stop the werewolves, sparing their lives. Carmilla heeded Zenos and returned to her floor upstairs. Linga sank to the ground, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. She assumed Zenos was Carmilla's master and dropped to her knees in terror to apologize. It was instinct. Werewolves were inherently afraid of high-ranking creatures of the night, such as specters and vampires. She even forced all of her followers to kneel and apologize to show their sincerity. Zenos could only sigh at their stubborn refusal to listen. The next morning, a demi-human came to the door with a message. Loo, the chieftain of the Orc tribe, was summoning Zenos. It seemed Zenos had yet another new visitor. The leader of the Orcs was a wealthy figure who had made her fortune mining magic stones. Zenos' clinic had barely opened, yet it was already entangled with all 3 demi-human factions ruling the slums. According to the Orc envoy, their leader Loo was a wise, dignified, and noble individual, which put Zenos somewhat at ease. Ever since he treated Zofia and her followers, Zofia had been showing up every day bearing extravagant gifts. Linga, under the pretense of apologizing, had taken it upon herself to build a lavish palace right next door. Zenos guessed that the reason Loo had not come in person was because she was too badly injured to move, so he immediately threw on his coat and set out. The Orcs lived inside a cave. Upon entering, he saw Loo already seated on high, waiting for him. Zenos had not expected that he had become a well-known figure in the slum underworld. The Lizardmen and werewolves had been boasting everywhere about having access to an incredibly skilled healer. Yet they kept his identity secret to avoid drawing attention. This piqued Loa's curiosity and led her to investigate Zenos. Loa had heard that Zenos charged fees proportional to the treatment. Zenos saw no external wounds on Loa, so he moved closer to examine her internally. Inside her abdomen, he detected a fluctuating mass of magical energy and guessed it was a magic stone. Loa confirmed his suspicion. It was an explosion-class magic stone of immense power. She had mistaken it for a rice ball and swallowed it. Worse still, she had bitten through part of the stone, meaning it would detonate before long. Even the slightest stimulation could set it off, which was precisely why Loa could not move. Her followers gathered around her in distress, vowing to die alongside her. Loa wanted to entrust all of her assets to Zenos so that after the stone exploded, her wealth would be put to good use rather than seized by others. She was not one for empty words and tossed the treasury key straight to Zenos. Zenos pocketed the payment and got to work. In a flash, he extracted the magic stone from Loa's body without causing her the slightest pain. Loa was utterly astonished by his ability. Afterward, Zenos wrapped the stone in a protective spell and let it detonate safely within it. It stung a little, but nothing he could not heal on his own. He returned the key to Lo and left, taking only a fee equivalent to the effort he had put in. Lo admired this trait in Zenos and promised she would be there in an instant if he ever faced danger. She even volunteered to serve as a guard for his clinic. From that day on, Zofia, Linga, and Lo kept visiting the clinic even when they had no injuries, much to Lily's annoyance. Carmilla suspected the three of them had fallen for Zenos. But Zenos refused to believe it, thinking of himself as nothing more than an ordinary unlicensed healer. Carmilla insisted that the way they looked at him was unmistakably that of young women in love. Lily felt a twinge of insecurity because the three of them were all strikingly beautiful, while she was just a child who could never hope to captivate Zenos. Carmilla predicted that if this went on, the three demi-human factions would eventually erupt into all-out war over Zenos. Carmilla's prediction came true. The three factions showered Zenos with gifts and competed fiercely to win him over to their side. Their battle was set for the following Saturday. Time flew, and the day of the fight arrived. All sides were brimming with fighting spirit, none willing to yield. Zenos showed up as well, though he had no intention of stopping the battle. And so they clashed from dawn until dusk, yet not a single person was wounded or killed. Zenos let them fight to their heart's content while quietly healing everyone from the shadows. At this rate, the battle would never end. Zofia, Linga, and Loa realized that everything they had been doing was not only foolish but utterly exhausting. After brawling all day, they had actually vented their frustrations. The three agreed to cease fighting and coexist in peace. The only thing left worth competing over was Zenos himself. Zenos looked at them and recalled the words his master had once spoken. Though he was still just a third-rate healer for now, he wanted to make the slums a slightly better place. Outwardly, Zenos claimed he did it because all the factions were valued clients of his clinic, and he could not afford to lose any of them. But Lily knew he was lying, because if everyone got along, fewer people would get hurt, and he would have fewer patients. Lily tugged at Zenos' sleeve and confessed that she truly liked him. But Zenos was too dense to understand that Lily's feelings had grown beyond those of a little girl. Lily was too shy to spell it out for him. Afterward, Zenos collected his treatment fees and headed home with Lily. The next morning, Commander anxiously summoned his deputy, Krishna, to his office. He had caught wind of rumors that the constant infighting among the demi-humans in the slums had died down. For as long as anyone could remember, these factions had been at each other's throats, so Krishna found it genuinely hard to believe they had stopped. What worried Commander was the prosperity of the Kingdom of Hazes. That prosperity rested on a rigid hierarchy with the royal family at its center. The frustrations of the common people were directed downward onto the poor. The frustrations of the poor accumulated and channeled into racial conflict, which in turn maintained the balance. If the major factions in the slums were to unite, they would pose a threat to the commoners, the nobility, and the entire ruling system. Safeguarding the stability of the capital where the king resided was the sacred duty of the Imperial Guard. Commander had heard rumors that some mysterious figure had stepped in to broker peace among the warring factions. This was even harder to believe, since Zofia, Linga, and Lo were each formidable powers in the underworld. They could not think of anyone capable of mediating between those three leaders. Even so, they could not afford to dismiss the rumor. This was a matter of national security, so Commander personally assigned Krishna to investigate. Krishna was confident that if such a person existed, she would find them. Back at Zenos' clinic, he was treating Zofia and Zond. This time, their injuries came from a run-in with the Imperial Guard during one of their heists. The one who had struck them down was none other than Krishna, known as the Steel Rose. She was always stone cold and unleashed devastating attacks. Anyone who caught her attention was in for serious trouble. Looking around, Zenos' clinic had become a gathering place for nothing but troublemakers. Zenos figured none of this had anything to do with him, reasoning that the renowned Imperial Guard would never bother with a lowly unlicensed healer in some crumbling ruin. Setting aside those headaches, Zofia, Linga, and Lowell launched into yet another argument over what to have for lunch. Lily happily went into the kitchen to cook. Before long, the table was covered with dishes and everyone dug in with delight. Krishna went undercover to the slums to investigate and found the demi-humans there living together in remarkable harmony. She questioned a lizardman on the street, but gathered nothing useful. She immediately drew her gun and pressed him to reveal the identity of the mediator. But that lizardman owed Zenos his life and would sooner die than betray his secret. Just then, Zofia and Zond happened to walk by, and the lizardman called out to them loudly. Krishna withdrew at once, knowing she was on enemy territory and a confrontation would put her at a disadvantage. But she had noticed that the wounds she had previously inflicted on Zofia's and Zond's arms had fully healed. The whole situation grew even more puzzling. Krishna had a terrible sense of direction, and after running blindly for a while, she wandered into the ruined district and stumbled upon Zenos' clinic, where she asked for directions to the city center. When Krishna saw Lily emerge from the kitchen carrying tea, she immediately attacked Zenos. Lily was so frightened she dropped the entire tray of tea and rushed over, but there was nothing she could do. Krishna assumed Zenos had kidnapped the child and struck without hesitation. She thought setting up a hideout in a desolate ruin where no one ventured was a cunning move. It took quite a bit of explaining from Lily before Krishna realized she had been too rash. Fortunately, the rounds she had fired were designed for capture, so they were not lethal but would render the target unconscious for a time. Once again, she acknowledged her weakness of being too impulsive. Krishna was even more astonished when the smoke cleared and Zenos was completely unaffected. She bowed her head and apologized to him. What truly shocked her was that Zenos could use a protective spell to block an attack from a magic gun. Although this seemed impossible to Krishna, Zenos truly had not a single scratch on him. She assumed he must be a legendary grand sorcerer who had devoted himself to protective magic since childhood, reaching the pinnacle of the art and earning a prestigious title. But Zenos immediately dismissed that theory. Krishna stubbornly clung to what her own eyes had seen. She revealed her identity and asked Zenos to assist her investigation. Thinking quickly, Zenos found a way to send out an emergency warning signal so that no one would come near his clinic, ensuring they would not cross paths with Krishna. Krishna also told Zenos about the classified orders she had been given, hoping to persuade him. Though she called it persuasion, she was really invoking civic duty to pressure him. Krishna had no idea that the very mediator she was searching for was sitting right in front of her. Zenos and Lily tried to talk her out of pursuing the mediator, but Krishna insisted that the mediator was a pawn of evil forces and would inevitably become a threat, leading a hostile power against the kingdom. Realizing they could not change her mind, Zenos urged her to leave. However, she found this place convenient for her investigation and suitable as a temporary base, so she offered to pay rent if she could stay. And just like that, the clinic gained yet another troublesome resident. Lily was not happy about Krishna staying. She tried to act closer to Zenos to one-up Krishna. Lily's battle for pride had officially begun. She constantly tried to prove her usefulness by helping Zenos with even the smallest tasks, but Krishna paid no attention at all, so Lily had to resort to the ultimate move Carmilla had taught her. She deliberately fell asleep on Zenos so he would have to carry her to bed. Lily thought she had won, but then Zenos turned around and went to talk with Krishna. Krishna asked Zenos about Zofia's miraculously healed arm, but he pretended not to know anything. In truth, Krishna's hatred of the slum dwellers had its reasons. Her mother had died because of them. In Krishna's eyes, her mother was the most compassionate person she had ever known. Seeing the people of the slums suffering in hunger and poverty, her mother had handed out porridge every single day. Then one day, she was robbed and killed. Because of that, Krishna resolved to become a perfect hero, so that no one would ever suffer her mother's fate. She wanted to punish every criminal in the slums. Through her achievements, she became the youngest deputy commander the Imperial Guard had ever seen. Her steely resolve on duty earned her the name Steel Rose. Some mocked her, calling it nothing but rigidity and stubbornness, but she understood herself well enough. Her face had become like a mask of steel. From the day her mother died, she had never been able to smile naturally again. The next day, after Krishna left, Zofia came to Zenos for treatment. But Krishna returned shortly after, having gotten lost again, and came face to face with Zofia. Both of them instantly drew their weapons, ready for a standoff. Zofia told Krishna that the mastermind behind the child trafficking ring she was investigating was, in fact, a nobleman. The operation was split into multiple branches to avoid detection. Krishna, of course, refused to believe anything Zofia said. Even when Zofia named Kalidor as the ringleader, Krishna maintained that he was a virtuous man devoted to supporting the education of orphans. Zofia said it was precisely because Krishna only looked at the surface that she was so easily deceived. The mediator was different. He did not judge people by their status or appearance, but simply healed whoever stood before him. Even if he disliked Krishna, he would still treat her if she were injured. Payment, of course, would be expected in full. Unlike Krishna, who simply branded every slum dweller a criminal. The justice Krishna pursued turned out to be nothing but a lie. This time, Zenos stepped in front of Zofia and revealed his identity. Krishna still could not believe that one person could master both protective and healing magic. But to Zenos, both were simply tools to enhance the body's functions and were fundamentally the same. These were things Krishna had never been taught in her magic classes. She still refused to believe Zenos was the mediator, but she concluded that he and the demi-humans were on the mediator's side. She decided to find another place to stay, not wanting others to think she was being deceitful. Krishna did not head to the slums but went instead to Kalidor's estate to speak with him. Before entering, she was required to surrender her weapons at the gate. She warned Kalidor to heighten security given the current situation. Using this as a pretext, she was able to personally inspect the security system throughout the estate. After making her rounds, Krishna noticed something odd. Kalidor was merely a mid to low-ranking noble, yet his security forces were unusually dense. Moreover, the layout was strange. The front gate was lightly guarded, but the rear was abnormally fortified. She found a deep shaft and took the risk of climbing down. What she discovered inside were children. She tried to rescue them but was spotted by Kalidor, who attacked her with a magic gun. He saw her as nothing more than a tool for dealing with the lowborn who stood in his way. Krishna was wounded and completely unable to fight back. Fortunately, Zofia arrived just in time. Kalidor still believed that with a magic gun in hand, he could easily take them down, never expecting that his bullets could not touch Zenos at all. He fired frantically until he ran out of ammunition, yet he could not so much as scratch Zenos. In his panic, he dropped his remaining loaded gun. Zenos did not hesitate to pick it up and turn it on him. Kalidor, terrified of death, begged for mercy over and over, but he had no idea whom he should truly be apologizing to. So Zenos shot him point blank in the head without a second thought. Before pulling the trigger, however, Zenos had set the gun's limiter to keep Kalidor alive, leaving him for Krishna to deal with. Krishna's condition was worsening, so she asked Zenos to report the situation to the Imperial Guard. Zenos went to her side, assessed her wounds, and treated her immediately. Having witnessed his abilities firsthand, Krishna finally believed he was the mediator. After everything that had happened, Krishna's confidence in herself had shaken, but Zenos reminded her that no perfect hero existed in this world. In the eyes of those children right now, Krishna was the hero who had saved them. Krishna had always thought of her mother as a pitiable victim. Only now did she understand that her mother had always been radiant, personally cooking meals and bringing them to the children in the slums. Her mother may have had plenty of flaws, but Krishna was certain she was the hero of her heart. The demi-humans helped them lead the children out of the cave and quickly withdrew before the Imperial Guard arrived. Krishna wanted to know why Zenos had saved her. He answered without hesitation. It was for the rent money and the treatment fees, and he made sure to remind Krishna to pay every last coin. For the first time in many, many years, Krishna burst into genuine, joyful laughter. In everyone's eyes, Zenos was now brilliant and radiant, but few knew just how dark a past he had endured. Back then, he had nowhere to go and could only sit huddled in a narrow alley. Astan spotted him and offered him a place in his adventurer party. When he heard that Zenos could perform healing magic, Astan secretly smirked. Convinced that a wretch from the slums could not possibly know such spells, he did not care whether Zenos had real combat strength. He simply wanted a free servant, and so they became a team and fought together. Zenos stayed in the rear and fulfilled his role as healer flawlessly, enabling Astan to take down their enemies. But once Astan gained a reputation, he convinced himself that he was invincible and tossed Zenos aside like dead weight. Astan's Golden Phoenix squad grew complacent and arrogant, spending their days feasting and drinking instead of honing their skills. This time, they wanted to impress the nobility and traveled all the way to a cave in a remote borderland to hunt fire foxes and harvest their fur for fennel. Gale cast a protective spell to shield Astan, but their overconfidence caught up with them quickly, and Astan's arm was soon scorched by the fox's flames. Yuma was bitten on the neck by a fox and could not fight back. Andres trembled as he attempted a destruction spell, but it made little difference. They had absolutely no ability to fight, so they had no choice but to retreat. After escaping the cave, Astan decided he would hire a healer to accompany them on their next attempt. Sometime later, Astan hired a healer named Yuman and returned to the cave. Unlike Astan's group, Yuman was only a mid-level healer and had little confidence in her own abilities. As for Yuma, although his life had been spared, he could no longer continue as an adventurer. Astan assigned each person a role. Gale would handle defense, Astan would whittle down the fox's health, and Andres would deliver the finishing blow with a destruction spell. Fennel wanted a fire fox fur shawl as a birthday gift for his daughter, so Astan could not afford to pass up this chance to curry favor. But the moment they entered the cave, they were ambushed by the foxes. Andres was critically wounded before he could even cast a spell. The foxes moved with incredible agility, making it impossible for Astan to land a single strike. Astan once again pinned the blame for this failure on Gale. Yuman quickly administered first aid to Andres, but given the severity of his condition, he needed to be taken to a proper healing institute equipped with magic formations to recover. Only then did Astan realize that ever since Zenos left the team, none of them could fully heal anymore. Even Yuman had never heard of anyone without a license who possessed healing abilities on par with a special class healer. This only reinforced Astan's belief that Zenos had been nothing more than a servant in the squad. This failure enraged Fennel, as it meant he would have nothing of value to present at his daughter's birthday. Astan wanted to blame Zenos for betraying the team and causing their defeat. But then he remembered that in order to hide the fact that the squad once had a member from the slums, he had never mentioned Zenos to the nobility. Realizing his slip, he quickly covered it up. He bowed his head to beg for another chance, though inside he was seething with resentment. He promised the messenger that he would quickly recruit new members for the squad. The person who came to mind was none other than Zenos. He assumed Zenos would be moved to tears when asked to return. Although Astan hated to admit it, everything had run smoothly when Zenos was around. Once again, he intended to use Zenos to restore his reputation and resurrect the Golden Phoenix. Astan and Gale headed to the slums to find Zenos. But the slums were vast, so Astan decided to ask the three major factions for help. First, he went to Zofia, but the moment he stated his purpose, she laughed in his face and refused. He then sought out Lenga, only to be cursed out and chased away. Finally, Astan turned to Lower, but one look at her expression told him he would get nothing, so he left. Lo even warned him that if he dared lay a finger on Zenos, the entire orc tribe would make him pay. Astan concluded that the Zenos revered by the three faction leaders and the Zenos he knew had to be two different people. He still refused to believe that Zenos possessed such formidable power. As fate would have it, Zenos happened to walk by at that very moment. Astan called out to him loudly. Zenos was mildly surprised to see him there, but had no interest in talking, so he continued on his way with Lily. Astan bluntly told Zenos he wanted him back on the team, but Zenos refused. Now, he only accepted missions with upfront payment. Each healing session cost 50,000 wen. Severe injuries were 1 million wen. If both protective and enhancement spells were required, the price tripled. Astan still believed Zenos was getting above himself, but reality slapped him hard in the face. Because Zenos had become a healer respected by every demi-human in the slums, Zenos did not bother with him any further and walked home with Lily. Astan shamelessly brought up how he had once taken Zenos in, but it was far too late for that. Burning with humiliation, Astan drew his sword and attacked Zenos, but before the blade could reach him, Krishna shot it out of his hand. For the crime of attempted assault, Krishna intended to take Astan into custody, but he shifted the blame onto Gale and fled. Zofia, Linga, and Lo told Zenos about Astan coming to them to track him down. All three had sent people to tail Astan afterward, but every one of them lost him. They feared he had enlisted help from the underground guild. This was an illicit organization lurking at the very bottom of the underworld. a place so vile that even demi-humans like them would not set foot there. The guild would do anything for money. Opium trafficking, assassinations, contract revenge. But hiring the guild required a substantial sum, and Astan was broke, so this possibility could be ruled out. Zofia suddenly recalled a rumor about someone who accepted requests based on certain conditions rather than money. This person called himself the guide. That night, Zenos could not sleep, so he asked Lily to brew him a pot of tea. After she finished, Lily gently patted Zenos' head to help him fall asleep. But she was the one who drifted off first. Zenos carried Lily to bed, and when he came back out, Carmilla was already sitting there drinking tea. So the two of them shared tea and conversation. Carmilla was curious about how Zenos had learned the art of healing. Zenos answered matter-of-factly that he had learned it while trying to bring dead bodies back to life. At the time, he had no idea it was forbidden magic, so his master beat him constantly. Carmilla recalled that when she was still alive, there existed a type of magic that created artificial life in the form of golems. During the Great War between humans and demons, when the Demon King still lived, it was a dark magic of the demon race that had since been lost to history. Golems created through this magic felt no pain and knew no fear. They simply carried out orders in silence, just as they were about to go to sleep. A massive tremor shook the slums. Carmilla flew outside to assess the situation and saw a golem rampaging through the district. Sure enough, Astan had sought out the guide and commissioned him for revenge, driven by nothing but petty spite. Yet the guide found this amusing and agreed to help. He happened to be studying a magic stone at the time and decided to put it to use. The golem tore through the slums as terrified demi-humans scattered in every direction. Although Zofia, Linga, and Loa were unharmed, many of their people had been seriously injured. Zenos asked the three leaders to gather the wounded in one place so he could treat them more efficiently. The guide watched from a distance. This golem had considerable destructive power, but was rather slow, so it still needed improvement. As far as the guide was concerned, Astan's commission was now complete. What he truly wanted to see was how Zenos would react when the people who looked up to him were dying before his eyes. Zenos immediately cast a wide area healing spell. He was quite irritated at having to heal several hundred people for free in the middle of the night. And on top of that, he was worried about Lily being home alone. He swore he would settle the score with whoever was behind this. Zenos' abilities far exceeded the guide's expectations. But if he kept healing without dealing with the golem, the root of the problem would remain unsolved. After working tirelessly, every last wounded person was treated. Thanks to Zenos, not a single life was lost. Now it was time to figure out how to handle the golem, since it would not stop until its orders were fulfilled. Carmilla guessed that its directive was to destroy the entire slum district. She could not understand where the high-purity magic stone used as the golem's core had come from. Stones of that caliber were supposed to exist only in the ruins of the Demon King's castle on the southern continent, and they had been almost entirely mined out during the Great War. The dark magic system had been lost for ages, and the materials needed to construct a golem were not easy to obtain. She could not figure out who could possibly have the means to create one. Unable to sit idle any longer, Zenos decided to take the golem down himself. Zofia, Linga, and Lo refused to stand by while their home was being destroyed and offered to fight alongside him. The only way to defeat a golem was to destroy the magic stone serving as its core, located somewhere on its body. Otherwise, it would regenerate endlessly. For now, they would test its strength. Zenos used his magic to enhance Zofia, Linga, and Lo. With Zenos backing them up, they charged at the golem without fear. They managed to inflict damage, but it regenerated almost instantly. A single swipe of its arm sent Linga flying, though Zenos' support kept her from harm. It had been a long time since Zenos had fought, but he was quickly finding his rhythm again. He made sure to maintain an optimal distance from Zofia, Linga, and Loa so his spells would be most effective. Moreover, healing, protection, and enhancement could not all be used simultaneously. Zenos had to cast protection to defend, switch to enhancement at the exact moment of attack, and immediately heal if anyone was injured. He noticed that the golem needed a brief window to regenerate, so he ordered everyone to destroy both of its legs at the same time. As the golem toppled, Zofia suddenly spotted a child hiding nearby and alerted Zenos. By the time Zenos rushed over, the monster had already fallen, yet it had not crushed the child. This struck Zenos as deeply strange. The guide then pushed the battle to its climax. Zenos scanned the golem and located the magic stone in its left chest. To breathe life into an incomplete magic stone, The guide had used a living person. He had fused a human being with the stone to form a new core. Because humans with complex emotions were difficult to control, he needed someone whose thoughts were negative, simple, and intense. Then, under the pretext of carrying out revenge, he implanted the magic stone into that person's body and used it as the core to resurrect the golem. And so Astan and this golem had been merged into one. Now the guide simply waited to see how Zenos would bring down the curtain. Zenos seemed to have made his decision and told everyone to stand back. He began speaking to Astan. Zenos had once heard Gale tell the story. Astan was obsessed with money and power because he had once been unable to afford medicine, and his little sister had died from illness. The child from earlier had reminded Astan of his sister, which was why he had saved her. Zenos believed there was still a shred of humanity left in Astan. While talking, Zenos had quietly drawn a blade. When the golem attacked, he swiftly severed both of its arms. Without hesitation, he carved open its left chest and, sure enough, found Astan inside. From afar, the guide assumed Zenos had mercifully ended Astan's life to spare him further suffering. But in truth, Zenos was simultaneously destroying and healing. He cut away the parts of Astan's body that had fused with the magic stone while restoring the mangled human flesh. One slip of the blade too deep would mean death, but a moment's hesitation would allow the stone to reclaim the tissue he had just healed. The guide could not believe that someone existed who, after healing hundreds of people, commanding demi-humans in battle, and supporting them from behind with everything he had, could still summon the focus to perform such a delicate diffusion. Although Zenos felt the world would be better off without Astan, he needed to save him in order to track down the mastermind. Besides, as worthless as Astan was, he had indirectly changed Zenos' life for the better twice. The first time was when he recruited Zenos into his squad. The second was when he tossed the coin at him as severance. With that single gold coin, Zenos had rescued Lily and opened his clinic. His entire life had changed from that point on. But the greatest reason Zenos did not kill Astan was simply this. He was a healer. Zenos successfully destroyed the magic stone and saved Astan just as dawn broke. Through this ordeal, Astan finally saw how terrible a person he had been and how much Zenos had done for him. He pressed his forehead to the ground and sincerely apologized. Zenos had saved just enough magic to punch Astan square in the face. The real reason he had kept Astan alive was that taking revenge on someone who was unconscious would not be satisfying in the least. When Astan opened his eyes, he found Krishna standing over him, there to investigate the monster incident. He was arrested on a long list of well-deserved charges. Zenos confiscated Astan's prized sword as compensation for damages and handed him a single gold coin as a parting gift. After an entire night of grueling work, Zenos was so exhausted he could barely stand, so Zofia, Linga, and Lo helped him walk home. The guide decided to lie low for a while. When everyone arrived back at the clinic, Lily was already there with tea brewed and waiting. She had known without a doubt that Zenos would come home. After an exhausting day, Zenos soaked himself in a hot spring to unwind. He had originally planned to be an inconspicuous unlicensed healer, yet somehow he had stumbled into one chaotic day after another. The investigation into the mastermind behind the golem incident had made little progress. The only thing they knew was his self-proclaimed name, the guide. The hideout Astan had described was already empty. Not a single trace remained. The guide had only recently joined the underground guild, always kept to himself, and never associated with anyone, so no information could be gathered. Although the Imperial Guard would add him to their list of dangerous individuals and launch a manhunt, he would likely stay hidden for the foreseeable future. After Zenos shooed everyone away, Lily shyly suggested they go to a hot spring together to relax. Zofia, Linga, Lo, and Krishna all had the same idea. Even Carmilla wanted to tag along. That evening, everyone headed to the hot spring as planned, and they all barged into the men's bath to fight over Zenos. Yuman, on the women's side, could hear their commotion. Zenos kicked them out, so they all moved over to the women's bath. Yuman was amazed to see different races happily sharing the same tub. Only Lily sat sighing sadly over her lack of curves, but when she noticed that Yuman was also on the flat side, Lily felt somewhat consoled. Carmilla reassured her that she was still growing and that not everyone preferred a larger figure, which helped restore a bit of her confidence. Seeing a vengeful spirit like Carmilla sitting among them without anyone batting an eye made Yuman wonder if she was hallucinating. After their soak, they all went out to eat together. Krishna still could not let go of her official identity enough to sit at the same table with everyone. Carmilla sipped her drink alone in a separate room. After a while of eating and drinking, Zofia, Linga, Lowen, and Krishna challenged each other to a drinking contest, with the winner earning the right to sit on Zenos' lap. In the end, all four passed out cold, while Lily was already fast asleep on Zenos' lap. Carmilla advised Zenos to enjoy these noisy days while they lasted, because trouble was heading their way. Zenos wondered how a vengeful spirit like Carmilla was even able to come here. Carmilla pointed to the staff leaning behind her and explained, as a spiritual entity, she could inhabit objects that held strong memories. During the day, she had entered the staff and asked Lily to bring it along. Although Zenos had asked several times, Carmilla still refused to talk about her own past. The next morning, a fire magic stone exploded while someone was cooking, injuring the chef. Yuman rushed over and administered first aid, easing his pain. Hearing the commotion, Zenos came to check on the situation. Yuman wanted to ask him to take the injured man to the Royal Healing Institute, but Zenos declined. Yuman assumed he was cold-hearted enough to abandon a wounded person, but when she looked again, the chef had already been fully healed. Yuman reported to Becker what she had witnessed, a healer who cured severe burns in the blink of an eye. However, she could not clearly recall his appearance and only remembered the name Zenos. Becker figured Zenos was not a bad person and let it go for the time being. But when Yuman mentioned that Zenos wore a black cloak, Becker's interest was piqued and he began investigating in earnest. He reasoned that if the kingdom had no records of this person, then he was likely not a registered citizen. In that case, the man could only be from the slums. Becker wanted to meet Zenos in his capacity as a special class healer. Becker disguised himself as a patient who had collapsed on the road, and Zond brought him to Zenos. After examining him, Zenos suspected he had contracted a disease resembling red lung and told everyone to keep their distance. Becker dropped the act, sat up, and praised Zenos for his sharp diagnostic skills. He cheerfully introduced himself. Yuman had followed Becker and found her way there as well. Becker had taken a drug that mimicked red lung symptoms. He knew the demi-humans here would be highly cautious, but if he feigned a serious illness, they would bring him straight to Zenos. The drug would wear off soon and posed no lethal risk. To be safe, Becker had also taken the antidote, so he was not the least bit worried. The drug was one Becker had developed himself as part of his research into a cure for red lung. Yuman proudly talked about the various treatments Becker had pioneered. When Becker first heard about a healer in a black cloak, he had assumed it was someone he knew, but it turned out to be a stranger. The cloak had been passed down to Zenos by his master, though Zenos himself did not even know the man's name, as his master had never revealed it. Becker proposed that Zenos join the Royal Healing Institute to help him deal with a certain matter. Sensing trouble, Carmilla raised a red flag as a signal, and Zofia, Linga, and Lo rushed over immediately. They stood united in protecting Zenos, which forced Becker to change his approach to a polite request, and Zenos agreed. Since his unlicensed practice had already been exposed, Zenos wanted to create a debt he could collect on later. Moreover, when red lung had broken out in the past, Becker had defied all opposition and spent his own money to distribute free medicine to the slums. Thanks to him, many lives were saved. On top of all that, Becker knew something about Zenos' master. Becker promised to tell him the story once they were back at the Royal Healing Institute. Their deal was finally sealed. Becker shook Zenos' hand with a smile and welcomed him to the Royal Healing Institute. Zenos arrived at the Royal Healing Institute. The place was grand and enormous, which felt a bit overwhelming for someone like him who was accustomed to living in the dark, damp slums. But once he reached Becker's office, he felt much more at ease. Becker got straight to the point. Zenos had already guessed what Becker needed: an investigation into a missing person. Becker wanted Zenos to gather information. Using his influence, Becker had arranged for Zenos to join the Institute's training program as an intern without going through official channels. This would make it much easier for Zenos to collect information. According to his file, Zenos would go by the name Zeno, a healer who had just returned from abroad. Since he was vouched for by a special class healer like Becker, the verification process would be relaxed. This also meant that if Zenos caused any trouble, Becker would be the one held responsible. Yuman had also gotten Becker's permission to bring Lily along under the guise of being Zenos' younger sister. Carmilla tagged along as well, eager to eavesdrop on everything. Zenos was worried about Carmilla, since if she were discovered, she could be purified on the spot. The next day, Zenos attended an orientation session at the institute, but still had no idea how to obtain a healer's license. Human eagerly guided him through the process. First, Zenos would need to apply to the Healer Training Academy for an aptitude assessment. If he passed, he would study there for several years. After that, passing the healing examination would earn him an official license. Licensed healers could then work at a branch of the Royal Healing Institute, join an adventurer party, serve as a private healer for the nobility, or enlist in the military. With enough experience and achievements, they could even apply to open their own clinic. The body overseeing all of this was the Royal Healing Institute. The more Zenos heard, the more his head hurt, so he changed the subject to the missing person case. The missing individual was Human Senior, a man named Alfred. He was an advanced healer and deputy head of the research department. Based on Human's assessment of Alfred, Zenos felt this was someone worth taking seriously in his search. While they were talking, Professor Goldrin walked in with a large group of students. He was an advanced healer, rank 7, and also the vice director of the Royal Healing Institute. Each tier, whether beginner, intermediate, or advanced, was further divided into 7 ranks. For the advanced tier, rank 7 was the highest, second only to a special class healer. The current director was elderly and frequently absent, so in practice, Goldrin was the one holding power. Ever since he became vice director, the institute had changed. On one hand, he treated the wealthy well. On the other, he discriminated against other patients. Instead of refining his healing skills, Goldrin focused on political maneuvering. Rumor had it that his current rank was the result of cleverly securing the backing of powerful nobles. He was possibly connected to Alfred's disappearance. Driven by his hunger for power, Goldrin sought to recruit the most talented subordinates to his faction, which was why he had specifically requested Alfred's transfer. It was a good opportunity for Alfred to broaden his horizons, so Becker had not objected. But 1 month later, Alfred vanished. Goldrin immediately washed his hands of any responsibility and even complained about being bothered. Zenos figured that to get close to Goldrin, all he needed to do was produce outstanding results, and the man would come to him. They were still talking when Krishna interrupted. He had come to thank Human for giving up her spot under Goldrin to their group. He also reminded Zenos to work hard so as not to embarrass the person who had recommended him. Although they were classmates, Human could not be bothered with Krishna, because ever since he joined Goldrin's faction, he had been looking down on everyone. Zenos recalled that when he was young and studying magic under his master, he had a fellow student named Veritora. Both of them were extremely talented and progressed rapidly, but their master always reminded them never to grow complacent. Back in class, although Zenos was already familiar with most of the material from his time as an adventurer, having it organized systematically still made it easier to understand. One student wanted to learn more about vengeful spirits. However, research on vengeful spirits had made little headway because every team that dared to challenge one had been wiped out. Students here were all warned that if they ever encountered a vengeful spirit, they must flee immediately, especially ones that could speak human language. Generally, any monster capable of speech was a high-level creature. If it happened to be a vengeful spirit, there was absolutely no way to fight it. At that moment, Zenos remembered that a talking vengeful spirit was currently relaxing in his room. When the instructor asked about combat experience with the undead, Krishna stood up confidently and boasted about having taken down 30 undead. The entire class applauded him. Noticing that Zenos sat in silence without joining in, Krishna asked about his record. Zenos needed to build a reputation but could not stand out too much, so he said something similar to Krishna, that he could take out 30 at once. Krishna accused him of bragging. Even the instructor was taken aback and asked him to elaborate. Zenos calmly explained that if you went into an underground labyrinth, there would be swarms of spirits. He would cast a single healing spell and purify them all in one sweep. What Zenos did not realize was that the Garmenton Labyrinth he casually mentioned was a place that even gold-ranked adventurer parties could barely reach. Krishna was deeply annoyed at being upstaged by Zenos. They moved on to studying healing formations. Zenos felt that if he had time to draw one of those, casting a quick recovery spell would still be faster. Krishna volunteered to draw a formation on the board to show off. Professor Faso saw great potential in him and wanted to invite him to join his research lab. But Krishna declined, saying he would rather give the opportunity to Zenos. Zenos only knew how to draw one formation, one his master had once shown him, so he went ahead and sketched it on the board. Krishna had never seen anything like it and mocked him. But Faso was utterly astonished because it was a regeneration formation. Zenos even had to explain the formation back to the professor. Faso, however, argued that this formation required an enormous amount of magical energy that no human could possibly control. Zenos proved him wrong on the spot. Although Faso could not fully grasp what Zenos had explained, he earnestly begged him to come work in his research lab. Losing everyone's attention yet again left Krishna fuming. Goldrin's secretary quickly informed him about Zenos' impressive performance. Shortly after, someone else came in to report that undead had been sighted at the Zula cemetery. Goldrin promptly assigned Zenos to exterminate them. That evening, Zenos returned home and had dinner with Lily and Carmilla. He could not help but think back to the lesson on vengeful spirits. If he simply observed Carmilla and wrote up a report, he could probably earn his certification right away. Later, a group of students headed to the cemetery as assigned. Krishna led a squad of students and charged forward, taking out spirits one by one. But the spirits were far too numerous, and before long the students were surrounded. Zenos did exactly what he had claimed and purified every last one of them in a single sweep. Krishna immediately took credit for the victory. But Yuman, who had witnessed everything firsthand, called him out. Krishna shamelessly told the others to go back and report his accomplishment. Then the real undead appeared. Every student looked to Krishna to step up, but of course he could not deliver. To save face, he told his classmates to go call for backup, while he stayed behind to hold off the undead. He threw everything he had into his attacks, yet he could not inflict a single point of damage. Zenos and Yuman stood watching him struggle, and in doing so, they also figured out why the undead had surged on such a large scale. Undead were drawn to stronger undead, so this zombie king was the root cause. Yuman did not want Zenos to help Krishna, hoping to let him suffer a little. But Zenos could tell she was actually quite worried, which was exactly why she had stayed behind. After dodging for a while, Krishna was finally beaten within an inch of his life by the zombie king. In that critical moment, Zenos could not stand by any longer and swiftly cast a purification spell to destroy the zombie king and save Krishna. The instant he escaped death, Krishna started arguing with Yuman again. Meanwhile, Zenos stood in silence, his mind on something else entirely. An undead far more powerful than this one. Zenos returned and recounted the battle that had just taken place. He knew that keeping Carmilla around would attract undead, but it was the best solution to avoid affecting the surrounding area. The students, unaware of what had truly happened, showered Krishna with praise. Krishna, too proud to admit the truth, said nothing to correct them. But this also meant Zenos had failed to meet Goldrin's expectations. After a bout of inner conflict, Krishna decided to come clean and tell the whole story. It lifted a weight off his shoulders, as he felt he had finally repaid the debt of having his life saved the night before. Just as expected, Becker soon received a summons for Zenos from Goldrin's research office. The first hurdle had been cleared. Now Zenos had to pass Goldrin's interview. Zenos found the convoluted rules of this place ill-suited to him. Although Becker held a higher title than Goldrin, he had no real authority. Moreover, Becker had earned his recognition through pharmaceutical development, which made him a special case. Knowing he could not avoid it, Zenos went to meet Goldrin and assess the situation firsthand. Goldrin advised Zenos that if he had the strength, he should aim for a higher position. In this country, healers held a very special status. The nation's history had been written by healers, yet the benefits were concentrated in the hands of the ruling class. Goldrin wanted to join that ruling class as soon as possible so that his faction would receive rewards worthy of their contributions. In his mind, the value of a life was never equal. Between the rich and the poor, the treatment they received was entirely different. He asked Zenos to redraw the formation he had sketched during class so he could evaluate with his own eyes whether Zenos was of any use. After seeing what Zenos drew, Goldrin found it quite intriguing, as he had never encountered such an application of formations before. This further convinced him that Zenos had a solid foundation, and he requested that Zenos join his team. The next day, Zenos officially entered Goldrin's ranks and accompanied them on rounds to visit inpatients. They moved in strict formation with Goldrin at the head, followed by everyone in order of rank. Before Zenos arrived, Krishna had been the one at the very back. Krishna also revealed to Zenos that Goldrin only visited the ultra-wealthy patients. Zenos moved up closer to the front to observe Goldrin, and discovered that he used a transference healing spell, drawing life force from the students to treat his patients. With this method, even if one's own magical power was limited, the results could still be impressive. The more severe the illness, the more life force was needed, requiring a larger number of healthy individuals to siphon from. This way, the patient would be saved. and each person who gave up a bit of life force would only feel slightly fatigued. That was why Goldrin recruited so many people into his faction. But the biggest reason was likely the upcoming election for Institute Director. The current director, Xiaobade, was nearing retirement, and Goldrin wanted to secure votes from influential figures for the next election. Krishna naively believed that Goldrin's victory was all but guaranteed, which meant his own career path would be wide open. Zenos took the opportunity to ask Krishna about Afrid. But all Krishna knew was that Afrid had been invited to a banquet hosted by Goldrin and vanished right afterward. Krishna still believed that anyone invited to that banquet was destined for a brilliant future. Zenos brought all of this information back to Becker. He assumed his mission was complete, but Becker wanted him to become one of Goldrin's favorites and infiltrate the banquet. If he pulled it off, his contract fee would be increased, and Becker would also turn a blind eye to his unlicensed practice. Zenos added one more condition. After the job was done, Becker had to tell him about his master. Becker readily agreed. He pushed his chair back, causing a shower of coins to scatter across the floor. Based on that, Becker posed a question. If Zenos were in this situation, which coin would he pick up? And did he believe the value of a life was truly equal? While Zenos was mulling it over, Human pushed the door open and led Becker away to a meeting. Zenos looked down at the coins on the floor and quietly reminded himself to keep pushing forward. That evening, Zofia, Linga, and Lo all showed up at Zenos' place without prior arrangement, having cleaned up his home while he was away. The next day, Krishna proudly boasted to Zenos about his duties in Goldrin's research office, which consisted of caring for the man's pet. He had heard that Goldrin had been invited by one of the 7 great nobles, and he was deeply impressed. He nurtured dreams of greatness and longed to enter the upper echelons of society. There was a time when Krishna had aspired to save lives and cure incurable diseases, but he came to realize that healing magic was not all-powerful, and that money and influence mattered more. Bonzen, Goldrin's chief secretary, suddenly appeared looking disheveled and drunk. He shot a disgusted look at Goldrin's pet and walked off. Then Bonzen abruptly turned back and hurled a wine bottle at Krishna, but it struck Milk instead, startling the animal into yanking its leash free and bolting away. Zenos and Krishna chased after it, but Milk was hit by a passing cart. Krishna rushed to heal Milk in a panic, but his skills were not enough to fully restore the animal. Seeing Krishna so distraught, Zenos stepped in and healed Milk completely, leaving not a single blemish, and even fixed a cracked rib while he was at it. Afterward, Zenos carried Milk back to let it rest. That afternoon, Human came to find Zenos and asked him to take a walk with her. After they had walked quite a distance, she apologized for dragging him into such a dangerous situation. Zenos, however, saw this as an opportunity to set foot inside the Royal Healing Institute and to learn more about his master. He thought his master was a suspicious figure, yet the man had taught him a great deal. He was something like a benefactor, much like how Becker had devotedly looked after Human when she decided to become a healer. But later, because Becker was so absorbed in his research that his partner left him, Human ended up becoming the one who took care of him instead. There was also something Human had forgotten to mention. Becker was actually her uncle. Still, Human felt that she was unremarkable in both magic and research. Zenos offered a few words of encouragement that made her feel better. In Carmilla's eyes, Zenos had just gained another candidate on his potential wife list. But since Human was quieter and less lively than the others, Carmilla gave her a 1-star rating. When they returned, Krishna came running up in a frenzy, his face etched with urgency. Goldrin had returned from dining with Fennel looking visibly troubled. Fennel wanted Goldrin to treat his daughter's condition. About a week ago, she had developed a rash on her cheek that had been spreading ever since. Goldrin suspected it was a demon-faced tumor. Although the disease was not life-threatening, by the time it was visible to the naked eye, it had already taken deep root and spread extensively. The only way to treat it was to excise a large area of tissue, which would leave a scar on her face. If a transference healing spell were applied immediately afterward, the skin could be regenerated, but Fennel's daughter absolutely refused to let a crowd of people see her face. She would allow no more than 2 assistants. Goldrin decided to go look at Milk to calm his nerves. But the moment he stepped into the hallway, he heard Bonzen mention that Milk had been run over by a cart, which sent him into a fury. Yet when he went to check on Milk and found not a single scar, he assigned the task of treating Fennel's daughter to Krishna. Krishna had no other choice but to go beg Zenos for help. The next day, Goldrin brought Krishna and Zenos to Fennel's estate. But trouble arose. Fennel's daughter, Charlotte, threw a fit and refused the surgery, locking herself in her room. Fennel and Goldrin did everything they could to persuade her, but Charlotte would not open the door. Crescent stepped up, buoyed by dreams of marrying into a wealthy family, but she dismissed him outright for his lowly status. Goldrin signaled for Zenos to try. With a single sentence, he struck at the heart of what Charlotte was truly worried about, that surgery would not be necessary. After a few reassuring words, he left the final decision to Charlotte, and she opened the door. But her temperamental nature had not softened in the least. She wanted the blemish gone but refused to endure any pain, would not allow blades or scissors near her face, and demanded that no scar be left behind. The conversation hit a dead end, and Charlotte stormed off. Zenos followed and discovered she had a fondness for birds. He noticed a wounded bird in a cage and felt it bore a striking resemblance to Charlotte, so he healed it on the spot. Charlotte reacted sharply when Zenos brought up the surgery again, as she was deeply afraid. But when she saw the bird soar and glide freely once more, a spark of hope flickered inside her. In Zenos' eyes, Charlotte and that bird were the same. As long as someone was a patient, their status did not matter. His job was to heal them. Won over by Zenos' words, Charlotte gathered her courage and agreed to the surgery. The moment the operating room doors closed, Goldrin handed everything over to Crescent and Zenos. Crescent's hand trembled as he held the surgical blade, unsure of where to begin. Zenos stood beside him, calmed him down, and guided him step by step through his very first operation. Goldrin saw how smoothly Crescent was performing and came over to commend him. But just as they were about to remove the last of the tumor, they discovered its roots had attached to a nerve. Complete removal would require cutting the nerve, but doing so would alter Charlotte's facial features. Leaving it behind, however, would cause the tumor to return and burrow even deeper than before. Goldrin chose to remove the tumor entirely to protect his own reputation. All he could do now was minimize the damage. He seized Crescent's hand and severed Charlotte's nerve, then loudly pinned all the blame on the boy, refusing to betray the trust Charlotte had placed in him, and so she could soar once more. Zenos stepped in and took control of the situation. He performed a nerve reconnection right before Goldrin's astonished eyes. The surgery was completed successfully in no time. The moment Charlotte woke up, she grabbed a mirror to examine her face. The tumor had been completely removed without leaving a single scar, and she wept tears of joy. On the way back, Zenos continued helping humans store Becker's experimental products in the archives. After his outstanding performance at Fennel's estate, Goldrin invited both Zenos and Crescent to his dinner banquet. Having worked alongside Zenos, Crescent had been completely won over by him. They made a promise to attend the banquet together. At long last, they were about to uncover the truth. At the evening banquet, Crescent announced that the director would officially retire at the end of the following month, and the election for his successor would be held. Goldrin's faction boasted the largest membership, so votes were not a concern. Fennel had also pledged his full support, which bolstered Goldrin's confidence even further. Everyone invited to this banquet had been handpicked from Goldrin's faction. Crescent eagerly ran off to flatter the senior officials in hopes of advancing his career. Zenos and Lily quietly went about their own work. They learned that Alfred had once looked after Bonds when he was drunk, so they sought him out to talk. Bonds only remembered that Alfred was a kind man who had given him water, and by the time Bonds woke up, it was already morning. Goldrin had told everyone that Bonds was a liar, so no one wanted anything to do with him, which ironically gave Bonds the carefree life he now enjoyed. When Lily asked about the relationship between Bonds and Goldrin, he walked away without a word. Lily was certain Bonds knew something but was deliberately hiding it, so she went to get more wine, intending to get him thoroughly drunk. Loosened up by the alcohol, Bonds rambled about his past dream of becoming a photographer. Zenos used this opening to learn that Alfred had gone outside for a stroll that night, and he guided Bonds out to recreate the scene from that day. Sure enough, Bonds mistook Zenos for Goldrin and spoke freely. He mentioned some incident from 13 years ago that had made Goldrin who he was today. Goldrin had once been a researcher whose work went unrecognized, but thanks to an explosion and Fennel's backing, he was promoted to professor at the institute. From there, he gradually climbed his way up to vice director. Just as Bonds was about to reveal the crucial detail, he passed out drunk on the ground. Zenos handed Bonds over to the staff and took Lily to a room to rest. Zofia, Linga, and Loa had been waiting at the clinic for Zenos to return. Then someone rushed in to report that Zond had been impaled in the abdomen by a broken pillar at a construction site and was in critical condition. They could not wait any longer and brought Zahn directly to Zenos. Carmilla, Zenos, and Lily began piecing the clues together. An explosion had occurred 13 years ago. A mediocre healer had saved a nobleman and changed his life from that day forward. If that were all there was to it, it would have been a well-known, heartwarming tale. But the fact that no one had heard the story proved something was being concealed. Anyone caught in an explosion would have suffered severe injuries, yet Fennel was perfectly healthy. With Goldrin's abilities at the time, there was no way he could have managed such a feat. Lily suddenly understood and laid out her theory. 13 years ago, an explosion injured a nobleman. A truly skilled healer saved him but said nothing and walked away. Goldrin happened to pass by and took credit for the rescue. Bonds had witnessed the entire thing, so Goldrin threatened him into silence. It was possible that Afrid had also stumbled upon this secret at the previous banquet and fled before he could be silenced. Shortly after, Crescent came looking for Zenos, wanting to introduce him to some high-ranking officials. Lily went with Crescent so Zenos could stay behind and talk with Carmilla. Both of them were thinking of a different scenario. The explosion that year could not possibly have had only Fennel as a victim, but Goldrin had found someone of high status to bestow a debt of gratitude upon. He had used the transference healing spell to drain the life force from the other dying victims in order to save Fennel. It was possible that Afrid was a survivor of that explosion who could not forgive Goldrin and had been harboring a desire for revenge ever since. Zenos thanked Carmilla for being there and helping him see things more clearly. Just then, a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Yuman was pleading with the guards to let her in to see Zenos. Zofia, Linga, and Lo had also arrived at the main gate, supporting the injured Zond and calling out Zenos' name. Goldrin furiously ordered the guards to drive them away. Linga dispatched them with a single move. Zofia dropped to her knees and begged Zenos to save her brother. Zenos could not possibly turn a blind eye. Goldrin stepped forward to block him, threatening to expel him from the faction. But Zenos did not care about any of that. The only thing that had ever mattered to him was his patience. He told Crescent to be careful, then picked up Lily and left. In that moment, the passion of a true healer surged back to life within Crescent, and he abandoned Goldrin to follow Zenos. Zenos was not the least bit upset that everyone had disrupted his plan. Instead, he blamed himself for not being there sooner. By the time Crescent caught up, the treatment was already complete. He insisted that Yuman take responsibility for what had happened. The next day, Zenos relayed everything to Becker. Becker confirmed that he had once heard Afrid mention an accident from his childhood, so the pieces were finally falling into place. The celebration banquet for Goldrin's appointment as director was scheduled for the following day. There was a chance Afrid would strike his revenge then. Zenos' mission was now complete, so Yuman wanted to throw him a farewell party that afternoon. When Crescent learned the truth about Zenos, he was saddened and unsure of what he would do once Zenos left. Carmilla also revealed herself for everyone to see. She was furious because Crescent had drunk all the wine she had gone through the trouble of stealing from Goldrin's estate. Yuman found it beyond comprehension that someone could casually converse with a vengeful spirit. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Zenos sat alone savoring a glass of wine. He felt a sense of redemption, knowing that even after learning of his true background, everyone still treated him the same. Yuman and Zenos went to Becker's office to retrieve a letter connected to his master, and they happened to find a strange photograph in one of the drawers. In the picture, students at a celebration banquet were sprawled across the floor. Goldrin was also dead, and the person standing there was Becker. Everything traced back to the explosion at the magic tool factory 13 years ago. On that day, after his research was rejected once again, Goldrin had been planning to return to his hometown. He stumbled upon the explosion and thought that if he saved a nobleman and earned his gratitude, his life would change forever. It was the first time he successfully performed the transference healing spell. Fortunately, the person he saved turned out to be Fennel, one of the 7 great nobles, but Bonds had captured that very moment in a photograph. To keep him quiet, Goldrin had to give him the position of chief secretary and guarantee him a comfortable life. After all those years, Goldrin had finally reached the pinnacle of prestige. Becker brought wine to congratulate him. Goldrin assumed Becker was trying to curry favor and took the chance to grumble about Zenos daring to treat demi-humans at his banquet. Fennel took the stage intending to recount how Goldrin had once saved his life, but Goldrin stopped him. Fennel yielded the spotlight. In Becker's office, Yuman and Zenos discovered the photograph Bonds had taken all those years ago. In it was not only Afrid but also a woman. When Goldrin came to, Becker admitted without a hint of fear that he had poisoned the wine. Although he had reduced the toxicity somewhat, Goldrin would not last more than a quarter of an hour. To Goldrin, every life lost that day had simply been waiting to die. But he never imagined that among them were Afrid and Becker's fiancée. Becker wanted to recreate the situation from that day and see what Goldrin would choose. Himself, or Fennel, or the faction members who had voted for him. Becker had also drunk the poisoned wine so that Goldrin would have another option, provided he believed Becker had the antidote. If Goldrin failed to make a choice, those lives would slowly fade away, and no one would survive. Goldrin chose to save himself first, then Fennel. The poison had begun to take effect on Becker as well. At that very moment, Human, Krishna, and Zenos burst in. Becker had done all of this because he had been tormented by the question of whether the value of a life was truly equal. 13 years ago, he and his fiancée had been healers just starting out. She had always dreamed of saving as many lives as possible. When Becker learned she had died in the explosion, he was consumed by grief. He had resolved to carry on her dream and save others. But after the banquet, Afrid told him the explosion was no mere accident. Then Afrid vanished. The thought that his fiancée had not died by chance, but by someone's design drove Becker to the edge of madness. Yet he had no evidence, could not find Afrid, and could not extract any more information. So he had hired Zenos. Krishna understood Becker's pain, but could not condone poisoning everyone just for revenge. They were healers, and their duty was to save lives. Zenos calmly answered the question Becker had posed before. If coins of every kind were scattered on the floor, which one would he pick up? Zenos' answer was all of them. Zenos used the most basic healing spell to sustain everyone's bodies until the poison ran its course. It became an endurance battle between the poison and healing magic. Human and Krishna joined in to help. Becker knew Zenos was talented, but never imagined he was extraordinary to this degree. Even now, Becker could not let go of the hatred in his heart. He recognized that this world was divided by class. He had been searching for an answer to whether the value of a life was truly equal. He realized he had become obsessed with that question. Meanwhile, the others were risking everything to save those lives, and in them he saw the spirit of his fiancée from years ago. Becker thanked Zenos for helping him save everyone, and for correcting his mistake. The only one who had not been healed was Goldrin. He demanded that everyone save him. But the students had now seen his true face and refused to lift a finger. Only Zenos was willing to help, on the condition that Goldrin pay a fitting price. Goldrin had no choice but to beg. His sole pillar of support, Fennel, also turned his back on him. Becker was arrested in accordance with the law. Through his connections, Zenos was allowed to visit him. They wanted to confirm the details of the poisoning, but what Becker had actually used was merely a temporary paralytic agent. His plan had been to frighten Goldrin into confessing his past crimes, but someone else had slipped real poison into the wine. The prime suspect was Afrid, but Becker did not deny his own responsibility. Even after realizing the wine contained actual poison, he had gone ahead and forced Goldrin to make his choice regardless. Krishna reassured everyone that even if Becker had not been the poisoner, she would use every bit of her authority as deputy commander to ensure his release. Both Becker and Zenos realized that given Afrid's condition in the photograph, combined with having had his life force drained, there was no way he could still be alive. A new question emerged. Who, then, had Becker truly been working with? This was no longer simply about revenge for events 13 years past, and the person who had thwarted that plot was Zenos. The next target of the mastermind could very well be Zenos himself. Zenos wanted to avoid trouble, but if the one behind it all showed their face, he would make sure to collect a fee for this whole ordeal. Zenos' visit to Becker was likely for Human's sake. She looked up to Becker as a pillar in her life, and if he were convicted of murder, her own convictions would crumble. That was why Zenos had brought Human along to confirm that Becker was innocent. The one pulling the strings behind everything was none other than the guide. He wanted to know what people would think and how they would act when pushed to the absolute limit. But Zenos had stood in his way. Afrid had also been nothing more than a cover identity for the guide. Zenos and Lily said their goodbyes to everyone, and to the Royal Healing Institute, heading back to their home. Before leaving, Lily called Krishna her big brother, which made him so happy he nearly cried. Carmilla appeared once more and warned Zenos that he was about to be swept up in yet another mess.